Welcome to the Peak Season Podcast, the show where we dive deep into all things short-term rentals, hospitality, and how to run your property like a pro. I'm Luke.
And I'm Tyler. We're two super hosts turned co-hosts who help owners transform their vacation homes into thriving businesses.
All right, welcome everybody. How's it going, Tyler?
Doing great, Luke. How's your week so far?
About the same, staying busy. How about you?
Understand. Exactly. A little rainy, but that's okay. We'll manage.
Yeah, you just got back from your cabin, right?
I did. Yeah. Spent a few days kind of winterizing, if you will, getting ready for our guest, for preparing for the winter. So, but it's never a bad time when you're up north. The fall colors were gorgeous. I feel like it was peak when we were there. So
Oh, really?
beautiful,
Nice.
beautiful weather, beautiful colors.
Very good. Well, anytime up north is good time up north, I think.
Absolutely.
Cool. So speaking of up north, today we want to talk about rural properties, how to overcome challenges of your short-term rental in a rural market.
Yeah.
So Tyler, what yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So as you guys know by now, Luke and I both own and operate in northern Michigan, and where we're at, we're not like in downtown Traverse City, right? So with that, we are in a more rural market, and with that comes challenges, right? Not just from attracting people to your markets, but also thinking about the seasonality and the impacts that has, in your rural market.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've operated in both rural and non-rural markets. I've operated in the Smokies as well. And I will say that there it was as easy as going onto a Facebook page and saying, I need XYZ. And you would have 10 people calling you ready to go to your property right then. But that is not the case in Northwest Michigan. And in some ways it's better. In some ways it's worse.
Yeah. No, great point. So,
Yeah.
I think today we're going to cover, guest acquisitions, connectivity, seasonality, maintenance, pricing, messaging, the ways that hosts can make rural hosting more predictable. And, our goal is to expect actionable strategies and tips for you guys as owners, and maybe even a little checklist that you can implement later in the week or beginning of next week.
Absolutely. I think we've also got much different demand profiles for rural markets as well from the guest perspective. That it's it kind of ebbs and flows a lot more than a lot of these bigger markets where there are, tons and tons of people coming all the time. But with that being said, there's also less competition. So sometimes you get to play in your own sandbox a little bit.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So why is rural hosting so different, Luke?
Well, I think for me, I found it almost refreshing when I pivoted up to Northwest Michigan and kind of came out of the Smoky Mountain market. There wasn't as much competition for bookings, which was amazing. But at the same time, there were fewer people to help. So you really have to build relationships with local vendors and make sure that you're maintaining those relationships and taking care of people, because without them, we absolutely do not have a business. So it's definitely a different animal for those two reasons mainly.
Yeah, that's a good point. And again, I only have most of my experience in northern Michigan, but obviously up north, seasonality can definitely impact us, right? Like I said, I prepared the cabin for winter, and winter is much slower up there for us than summer, right? Summer's our peak season, right? But I think there's still opportunity for hosts to take advantage of and maximize their nightly rates during the slower part of the season in a rural setting.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got just a list of a few things here that we want to talk about in this episode.
Yeah.
So the first one that I've got here is driving bookings in low density markets.
Yeah. So, oh, sorry.
No, good. No, go ahead, man.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the challenges is you have fewer eyes on your listing, right? So seasonality spikes. And, I think one of the solutions here is to capture intent driven searches and out convert the competition. Talk to me about that, Luke. Like what comes to your mind when you think about capturing those intent driven searches and trying to convert that?
Sure. I mean, the first couple things that I'm going to do are make sure that my top 5 pictures are seasonally based, and in my tagline or in my title on Airbnb, I'm saying fall escape or fall colors or ski trip or something like that that's going to catch the
Yeah.
attention of somebody that's booking. So those are the big things that I'm going to do. And
Mhm.
then I think one of the advantages that we have being in smaller, more rural markets is when we go into the Facebook groups and try and
Yes.
market specifically to these targeted people. There aren't very many people doing that.
Yeah.
So we get the opportunity really to have a captive audience there where there might be only two or three people in some of these Facebook groups that are actually saying, "Hey, the colors are peak right now. I'm open next weekend. We'd love to host you." Or they're going to respond when people come in there and they're looking for stuff. In the Smoky Mountains, there might have been 1,000 people in a Facebook group with the same exact post, so it wasn't quite as effective.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, you know, other groups that we maximize or utilize Luke up there is, once we know that snow's hitting and we know which ski resorts are starting to make some powder, we're hitting those Facebook groups, right? Those Michigan ski groups, and really starting to promote our properties on those more local pages as well. So again, to your point, get out there and use social media to its power, right? And I think you brought up a good point on, even obviously your five pictures are key, but also the key words in your title are critical. So, be mindful of what your titles are if you are changing them. You don't want fall foliage to be showing as in a key search, probably at this point, being that it's getting ready to be over, right? We need to start looking at things to get guests to book for, November and December.
Absolutely, and also showcasing your winter amenities.
Yeah.
So on my properties, I'm talking about wood burning fireplace. I'm talking about the hot tub. Tyler, I'm sure you're pushing the sauna right now because you've got that beautiful
Yep.
sauna that overlooks the lake. So we're talking about things that people that really set us apart in the market. And there's not, going back to our earlier point of it being a smaller market, there aren't that many people that have hot tubs or saunas. So we almost have a much easier time getting booked in the winter than we do even in the summer.
Yeah, good point. And I know this was kind of talking about it from the host perspective of, from that marketing perspective, but let's talk about challenge number two, rule settings. We talk about what are some of the issues, connectivity, right? Maybe it's the Wi-Fi or something else, and access to your property. So let's talk through that.
Sure. So I think two of our properties are right down the street from each other. So cell service is spotty as you're coming in there. And I send that out in my messaging that morning and I say, hey, when you get close to the cabin, cell service is spotty. I make sure they have good directions. Um, when Airbnb allowed it, I gave my personal number. And I
Yeah.
said, hey, it's sometimes easier to shoot me a text or give me a call if you can't find the property, than to send a message out on Airbnb. And just really, making sure maybe I'm sending a map of how to get there, like a screenshot or a turn by turn direction, things like that. And one of my other properties is a little bit more difficult to find. It's kind of like a subdivision, and the Google Maps isn't great in the subdivision. It'll take you down some phantom roads and stuff like that. So I'm actually sending a screenshot of the correct way to get in. So being proactive, at least as far as the guests not having cell service when they first arrive, is very helpful, and making sure that they have the Wi-Fi code over and over and over again because that's all they're going to want when they walk in the door.
Yeah, and I think when I'm thinking about connectivity and access, I think I use mesh Wi-Fi system. I think it provides the best bandwidth for internet access. I know Luke, both you and I have backup generators at our property. I'm gonna tell you what, it's an expensive investment, but man, has it saved me on so many occasions. And not just in the winter, it saved me in the summer too. And talk about losing a potential $8,000 booking over the summer because you went out of power for 2 days for a bad storm. I mean, up there we have what's called the gale winds, and gale winds can happen mainly in the winter, but it can happen in the summer too. And if your area is lined with trees like ours is, and you still have the old towers that they're not, the electricity is not underground, you're going to lose power. So having a,
Yeah,
a backup generator, even if it's not a Generac, maybe just having a one of those gas powered generators to get you by with the main things like your kitchen, your fridge and things like that you can plug in to make sure food doesn't go bad, I think is worthy of investigating and exploring, and potentially implementing in your property.
Yeah, I agree, and I also think I don't have the stats to prove it, but I take a picture of the generator and I put it right in my listing, and I put copy
Yep.
beneath it that basically says you don't have to worry about Thanksgiving dinner being ruined because the power's out. Um, but it's true. If somebody's planning an event at your place, having a generator and making sure they know it might get you booked when somebody else is not.
Yeah. No,
So
good
and
point.
there's not many places that have generators up there, and everyone knows it's rural. That's why they're coming. And the power is not as reliable as it could be.
Yeah. And I know we talk and we'll talk about this probably in a future episode, right? I think you and I, Luke, are pretty big advocates of using like slage locks and things of that nature. And I think people are a little weary sometimes about those. But to be honest with you, again, I think they're still pretty fail proof. Every slage comes with a key. I have a little lockbox by my property, and I have a picture and a tutorial, and I have the code for that if needed, where they
Yep.
can still use a key to unlock if for some reason the power went out, my backup generator went out, everything went out, they're still going to be able to access the property.
Yep. And I found Schlage to be extremely reliable even when the power is out. So the
Yeah.
codes are already on it. So I've never had an issue with the power being out and the Schlage not working.
Yeah.
But yeah, you need to have absolutely the lockbox backing that up. But that would go for any market, I think, too. I
For
mean,
sure.
you can't be totally reliable on that one piece of tech.
Yeah.
And actually, moving further into the connectivity piece, I actually had to get Starlink at my place in Bel Air.
Oh,
Yeah, so but so far it's working great. It's just as fast as anything else, but it's been 100%
very cool.
reliable. Yeah, yeah, but that's another challenge that you might have to face up there and factor that in. If you're shopping in these rural markets, Starlink probably costs 2 to 3 times as much as the internet does in other places up there. I think it's about 2.5 times as much as what we're paying.
So let's go into challenge number 3, Luke. We'll talk about maintenance and supplies and response times. We talked a little bit about that, but there's fewer vendors, longer travel times. There's a lot of things that are maybe a little bit more unique to a rural market. So let's talk a little bit about some ways to be maybe proactive, or just some ways to overcome some of these challenges in a rural area as it relates to maintenance and supplies and response times.
Sure, this is a big one. Not having people, your handyman might be an hour away in some instances, and that's a struggle that is really an issue. At least in my experience, I had a guest arrive to a broken pipe one time, and I called the handyman right away, and he said he dropped everything and he was on his way, but it took 55 minutes for him to get to my house, and the whole time water's flowing. So that's something that we need to plan for as best we can. That could have been a lot worse because I maintain a relationship with my handyman, and when I call, he answers, and he dropped whatever job he was doing and came straight to me. So you know, as much as we can, we need to foster good relationships with our vendors and make sure that they're going to take care of us when things like this come up.
That's such a critical point that you just mentioned. If there's anything you take away from this, and you're not doing it, or you haven't done it, or you're new to the game, please, please, please make sure that you are establishing great partnerships with. There's two people that are going to make and break you in Airbnb, right, or a short term rental in general, and that's your cleaners and that's your handyman, right?
Yep.
Build great relationships with them, and trust and transparency, right? I think that's critical. Your point of, the handyman dropping, what he was doing to come fix yours and prioritize it is huge, right? I had something happen this winter. I had a couple guests, they were in their mid 80s, right? Had a little bit of a challenge trying to get the TV to get on. The app wasn't loaded for charter, and they wanted to watch a Michigan game. And one of my cleaners luckily lived down the road. She came out. It was snowing. She came out. It was dark out, and she helped guide them through. Right. That I don't know, just that level of care, I think, is huge, and they were so appreciative, as was I. Because I was trying to walk them through over the phone, but it just was something that just was easier for her to handle, and help them out in that moment. So Relationships matter.
Absolutely, and I think that's sort of a segue into, and I think we still have more to talk about as far as this challenge goes, but also just if we could kind of double click on that a little bit. I think in these rural markets, the conventional property management method would have failed in that instance, right?
Oh yeah.
Um, so they probably wouldn't have answered the phone for that elderly couple that couldn't figure out the TV, or they certainly wouldn't have sent somebody over. And that's where we as owners slash hosts, or boutique co-host companies, can really elevate the experience and really outshine, and take hosting to another level in these rural markets, where before it's probably just kind of been at a very low level.
Yeah, I was even reading some reviews, right? So I always am looking at what I call the enemy method, right? Looking at my
Yep.
competition, looking at their reviews, and saw one recently. It was a very large property management company, and they got a 3-star review by the guests, and it said that there was a water heater issue. The water wasn't heating, right? And they tried to call, they emailed, they texted, got a response 2 days later. Just absolutely unacceptable. And that's one of those things that, when you're dealing with large property management companies, you're not getting that attention and prioritization that maybe you can with a unique or boutique co-hosting company like us here at Upstream Vacations.
Absolutely. Okay, so as far as preparing your cabin, are there things that you're doing that you might not do if you weren't in such a rural market, as far as stocking or things of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple different drawers, right, in the house. Kind of the I don't know what you want to call it, but it's just got a plethora of different things, from flashlights to candles to we have spare blankets. We have a small tool set right in the laundry room, right? Who knows what you may need, a screwdriver, a hammer, whatever. Some of those things are those things that I always keep on hand. Extra cleaning supplies underneath the kitchen sink. Batteries. Oh, I am big on batteries. I keep multiple packs, double A, triple A, 9 volt. I was actually just replacing all the batteries this weekend up north, Luke. And one that I always try to do at my main home as well as my vacation home is replacing the smoke detector batteries, right? Those 9 volt batteries. And I just thought about it. I was like, I better put some spares, because you just never know, right? You think that they're going to last a year, but what if they don't? I have
Yep.
a ladder. So somebody can reach something if they can't. Those are some of those things that I like to just keep on hand and available for our guests.
Yeah, I'll actually, well, actually, as far as smoke detectors go, now I'm trying to go over to those 10-year smoke detectors. Have you seen
Hmm.
those?
Yep. Yeah.
So that's where I'm going. But for the properties that still have the conventional smoke detectors, I'll leave the batteries in the drawer. I replace them every 6 months, but I just know that one is coming for me one day. Um, and I'll actually hide a 9 volt battery. My go-to hiding place is above the microwave, and whatever cabinet's above the microwave, because nobody ever looks there. And it's the same in
That's
all
a
my
good one.
houses. And if there's ever a chirp and the guest messages me, I can say I know that in every single one of my properties there is a 9 volt battery up there that nobody will ever find
I
until
love it.
that day comes.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, I hate
Um,
chirping smoke detectors, because they always start at 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't know if that is just how they're manufactured. They know when it's dark and nobody talks for a while that it's time to start chirping. That's how
yeah.
it always works in my house, anyways.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to kind of wrap this up, again, I think, having your vendor contact list, nope. But more importantly, yes, it's great to have your list of your vendors and people that you use, but it's more important to have relationships with them and establish trust and transparency with them. And that goes further than anything. And, just as Luke's example before, when people care about you and you truly genuinely care about them, they're going to look out for you, and they're going to prioritize you and help you out when you're in a tough spot.
Yeah, I think one, especially when it comes to handymen, in the Smokies when I operated there, I would try and rotate through different ones, always to so if something happened and one wasn't available, then another one was, and
Mhm.
so I had two or three good go-to handyman, but I noticed up in Michigan, what I will generally do is I have one good handyman, and I have asked him for referrals for backups.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that has worked out well. I said, hey, I'm always going to call you first, but just in case you aren't available, do you have somebody else that you would refer me to? And that way, you're kind of being transparent with him, so he knows that he's your guy.
Yeah.
But you know, so it's kind of like it's just a pivot and maintaining that relationship in a rural market.
Yeah, and even that you made me think about something I actually recently did. I have they were actually prior guests at Seven Pines
Hmm.
that I had hosted who found a property along our drive and built a house up there, and they're both retiring and moving there full time. And I was speaking with them, and just he's a pretty handy person. He built their house for him. So I've actually talked to him and worked some things out to where, if I need something at a whim or something breaks, he offered to, come out and help if and when needed. And he lives what, 4 houses down the road. So how nice is that to have as a backup when you need it?
That's incredible. Nice. Cool. So it brings us down to challenge four, seasonality and cash flow.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I
So
think when I think about seasonality in Northern Michigan, as I do, and you could do this anywhere, right? This could be flip-flopped in Florida, right? In Florida, this is your bread and butter season, but up north, this isn't our bread and butter season coming up. So, you have to adjust prices as things go, right?
yep. So we've got bigger revenue swings. I mean, I've noticed that I can pretty much stay booked almost year round, or at least on weekends year round. But a weekend booking in the summer versus a weekend booking in the winter is going to be wildly different ADRs, and we have to pivot and really just keep our eye on that and set our expectations accordingly. But I think that goes for any market with big seasonality. But I think in the rural ones, you need to be even that much further ahead of it because there's just going to be less demand.
Yeah, great point. And I don't know if you utilize these, Luke, but other ways of income that I look at is using upsells through Hospitable. So I don't typically have same day turns in the winter as much as I do in the summer. So I use upsells to offer early check-ins at a rate. Right. So if they want to come an hour early, it's $25. If they want to come 4 hours early, it's $100. Things of that nature are things that I started implementing. How about you? Any other ideas or thoughts?
Yeah, I think the upsells are always good. I typically, I always try and upsell extra days. I don't
Yep.
tend to upsell early or late checkout, mainly because I'm leaning so heavy into upselling extra days.
Yeah.
So if somebody wants an extremely late checkout, then I might say I'll block an additional night for you. I explain it very explicitly though, like if you want to stay in the cabin until 5 p.m., then I'm gonna have to block that night. So and I can do that, but the cost is this.
Yeah.
But,
No, that's a
uh,
that's a fair point. And I do the same. I think I definitely prioritize selling a gap night, right? Either on the front end or the back end. But, again, maybe it doesn't work, right? Maybe they're not looking for that. Well, you still got the upsell for the late check-in or
mhm.
early check or late checkout, early check-in as an option.
Yeah, I think one of the especially during the summer when they're spending more money, if I do have an empty night in front, like I'm more apt to let them in quite a bit early. But usually an hour or two I don't charge for. But especially if they've gotten a message a few days before saying that the day before is open.
Yep.
So it doesn't really cost me anything to let them in an hour early or whatever. Now if they want to come in earlier than that, we're
Yeah.
definitely gonna have to charge for it. But an hour or two early, I don't feel like that's too big of a deal.
Sure.
Yeah, but being proactive and one of the things I'll do, so maybe in April or May, once my summer's all the way booked out, I go through and I hit every single gap night and try and upsell and fill it. I know you're typically on a 7 night Saturday to Saturday, I think, but
Yeah.
I don't operate with that one. So sometimes I'll have one night here or there, and I've been able to fill those with a lot of success. Um, I think I had maybe 2 nights open for the whole summer last year. So, but
Yeah.
and I'll go through and I'll just message every single guest that has a night before or a night after. and make them a special offer and see where it lands.
Yep, I did that in September and October and had success with that as well. So yeah, proactive, reach out, look at those gap nights, and reach out to your guests that are already booked and offer them the opportunity. Right.
Yeah,
Well,
and
we
once
think
again, that's
about.
something that a conventional property manager is probably not going to be doing.
Oh yeah, agreed.
They would much rather probably have the gap so that they can get their cleaner in there on the gap day or not have a same day turn to have to worry about. They're probably more worried about streamlining their operation than maximizing the revenue.
Yeah, good point. Another thing to think about, guys, when we're talking about cash flow and the seasonality, I'm definitely charging a much higher ADR in the summer than I am in the winter. I stash some of that cash as as a reserve, right? In case things happen. So annually I put away money as kind of my maintenance fund and other things, right? It's kind of for maintenance and things I want to invest in the property later down the road. So think about that when you're thinking about these rural markets and when you have your low season, and make sure you're not just allocating all this money, pocketing it yourself or whatever. But if you don't have a fund or a reserve set aside, you need to start thinking about doing that, especially as you operate in some of these rural markets and something happens, and having that cash that you need on hand is important part of maintaining and operating your Airbnb.
Absolutely, and I think one thing that stands out even more in a rural market and going down that road is, say you've got money stashed for maintenance, but you might have to take your property down longer for that same amount of maintenance than in other labor heavy markets. So getting a bathroom painted or something might take a week instead of a day. So you might actually need, to plan for less income during a certain period where you need some stuff done.
Yeah, that's a great point. I try to prioritize any type of home maintenance now because I don't want to be doing that come May, right? When we're starting to get higher rates and book up more frequently. Let's go
Absolutely.
into that challenge 5: local rules, neighborhood relations, and just community trust in general. So when we think about this, maybe there's neighborhood complaints or reputational risk. How do you navigate those things, in a rural market, Luke?
Yeah, I think this is the first time in Northwest Michigan that I've hosted in areas where there are people that live there or that's their second home and they have no intention of ever renting it. Um, Prior to this, I've always operated where everything's a vacation rental and it's expected that there's going to be people coming and going. So you do have to handle that delicately. A lot of these homes they've been in people's families for generations, or it's their
Yeah,
baby, or they've saved their whole life to live there, and they're not thrilled with basically living next to what amounts to a hospitality business. So you really have to build relationships with those people, be responsive when they talk to you, or when they reach out with an issue. I know, our neighbors up there at Seven Pines, we'll typically have drinks with them when we're up in town. They know our kids' names, and I've told them specifically, like, hey, this is one of the ways I'm paying for these kids' college. It's
yeah,
not, this isn't, private equity coming in and buying up houses. This is, my
right.
wife and I planning for our future. So when they put faces to the names and they understand what it is that you're actually doing, they become a lot more tolerant.
Yeah,
And also just doing little things. For example, one of our neighbors didn't like how close our fire pit was to
mm,
their window,
yeah,
their bedroom window, so that they could hear people's conversations late at night. And so we built another fire pit in a more convenient location on the other side of the property, and people would tend to use that one a little bit more. Um, and it wasn't that big of a deal, but they were very, very appreciative that we made the gesture just to say, yeah, we hear you and we'll try and take care of that.
yeah. I think, to your point, it's really about, again, establishing that trust, being proactive, reaching out to the neighbors, going to introduce yourself, right? And put faces and names together, and letting them know that this is, a part is to our points. This is our own kind of small business, but we're doing this to help our future and our family's future. So I think that's key. Some other things I think about is just, when I've met with neighbors, I share my rules with them. I ask them for input. I've done that, you know. I said, hey, do you feel that this is a fair quiet hours time? Is 11 to 8 fair? Right? Maybe they go to bed at 8 o'clock. I don't know, but I'd say most of them are like, yeah, that seems respectful, right? And so now you're sharing again. You're being transparent. You're sharing, but you're also saying you're receptive to feedback. I think that's again an important part of building that trust and that transparency with these neighbors and trying to reduce any complaints or noise, from the neighbors surrounding you.
Yeah, and I think it's gotten specifically as inflation's increased and cost of living's went up in a lot of these markets. There's been a finger pointed a lot of times at the short-term rental operators,
Hmm.
and that's made things more challenging for us, especially in some of the cities and municipalities where they've passed regulations against short-term rentals, and ultimately it just becomes another way for us to stand out or to build ourselves a moat. I know both of us operate in areas in Northwest Michigan where there are almost no regulations, but we're tucked in between areas where there are more,
Right.
which just kind of provides a funnel into our properties. So, you know, it, in some ways it's a challenge, but in other ways it's sort of an opportunity for us to do better.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. So, guest experience and tactics. Let's kind of wrap it up. So, I think um, creating, some recommendations, creating local guides with maps, you said, right? Driving times, seasonal tips, putting things again, proactive communication. Luke, I think you do the same thing as me. Like I say, hey, in the winter, it's probably beneficial to have a 4-wheel drive vehicle. I don't want somebody coming up with a rear wheel drive vehicle and it's expected to get 10 inches of snow, right? They're going to
Yep,
struggle getting to our properties. Again, include quick starter kits or just access to quick things like, the flashlights, the batteries, things of that nature. Um, pre-arrival messages, setting the expectation, all of these things, are critical when we're talking about the guest experience and being able to be successful in a rural market, and especially maybe in a rural market and low peak seasons.
absolutely. And just to kind of piggyback off what you're saying there, I think the more that we're communicating proactively with guests and we understand, like, are they flying in or are they driving in? Because those are two very
Mhm.
unique challenges. And we do get some people that fly in, but they might be renting a car that doesn't have. They don't even know if they're going to have all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, um, and sort of setting that expectation just to say, hey, like if it snows, you might have a challenge with that.
Yeah.
But and also just talking about like say we do get a snowstorm and we have our snowplow guy come out and plow the driveway. He shovels off the entryway and all that. That's no guarantee that it's not going to be drifted back over or there's not going to be more snow before the guest gets there. So, one of the things
Right.
I'm saying in the winter months is like, hey, we make sure that we're getting regular, services, but I don't live across the street with a snow shovel and a snowblower. I can't. You
Right.
might arrive to some snow. So if they know that in advance, they won't be as put off by it.
Yeah, exactly. And again, we've kind of mentioned it before, but there's definitely some advantage to utilizing organizations like ourselves that have that knowledge and understanding of these rural areas and properties and connections and the rural hosting benefits from experienced co-hosts like ourselves who know local vendors. We know the travel logistics, we know the demand cycles. All those things are things that we're looking at, evaluating, communicating not only with our clients but also with the guests as the co-hosts.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tyler, if you could boil this whole episode down to maybe two or three pieces of concrete advice for people operating in a rural market, what would the first one be?
First one is going to be vendor relationships. Your relationships with your handyman and your cleaning crew, all your different vendors, having that trust and transparency is critical in these rural markets. I think another thing is you know, dynamic pricing. Looking at the demand, knowing what's happening and where to maximize revenue, all is important in maximizing your ADR and getting um, getting occupied at the highest rates you can during low seasons. I think those are the two that really stick out the most to me. Three, proactive communication, just as we had just kind of piggybacking off what we just said. And we've mentioned it in multiple episodes, right? It's critical to be proactive and be communicating to your guests through their stay or prior to their stay, and helping them understand maybe some of the challenges or things that they may expect to come up during their trip. That helps alleviate any surprises, and also really helps with alleviating less than a 5-star review.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything you said, and specifically the communication part of it. And talking to the guests in these rural markets, guests absolutely love having their person on the inside or their local help. So if you know all the places to go, when they're on their way in, you say, hey, the store that's closest to the cabin closes at 7 p.m. Your flight doesn't land till 6. I would suggest you stop here instead. Things like that go a long way to elevating the level of hospitality and really thriving in these rural markets, whereas some other hosts might just be surviving.
Yeah, great point. Rural markets, they're challenging, but I think, to me, challenges equal opportunities. And as long as we're proactive and we're doing our due diligence and we're being great hosts, I think we're going to be successful no matter where we're at and in what season we're in.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've kind of beat this one to death. Tyler, let's go ahead and close it out. Yeah. As always, we would appreciate a 5-star review from you if you've gotten any value out of this. And if you want to check out what Tyler and I are doing, you can take a look at us at upstreamvacations.com. And once again, that's
right.
upstreamvacations.com. And we will see you all in the peak season. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everybody.